Okay guys, so today we're going to be creating an envelope animation using only CSS, no JavaScript required. We have the final product here, so we can hit run and we can see the full animation. And it looks something like that. So here's our HTML, and let's get rid of the CSS, and then we'll go over the HTML really quickly. I don't want to go too deep into HTML since this is a CSS tutorial, but we have the envelope, which is just this div that kind of acts as a container for everything you see here, from the icon to the image to the flaps, everything. And then we have the flap, which is what animates open and close. We have the envelope back, which is just this little tiny bit you can see behind the image after the flap opens. And then we have the image, of course. And then we have an SVG, which is just this icon. If you want, you can copy it. I'll link my code pin down below. And then we have the envelope front, which is going to be this piece right here with these little 3 triangle type things. And then that's going to be it for HTML. So how do we build this? How do we build out the animation? So if we run this, we'll see we have our CSS is gone, so we just have a big image and like an icon behind it. So just like usual, we'll start by creating variables. Now CSS has its own variables that we can access using root. That way we can create variables that are accessible by all classes. And then the way you create a variable in CSS is you go dash dash, you give it a name with a dash as spaces. So let's create a variable for image width. The image width we're going to say is 20 view width. And then we're going to create another variable for half of the image width, and you'll see why later. And half the image width, since image width is 20, it's going to be 10. And then we're going to create a variable for envelope width. The envelope width is going to be 40 view width. And then we're going to have 2 variables for the movement, animation movement. So we're going to have move down. And we're going to use something called calc. Now calc just allows CSS to do math. So we can say, do some math on the variable image width. And the math I want you to do is I want you to get 75% of the width. So multiply that by 0.75. And then make sure we get our semicolon. And then we'll have a move up variable, and this is going to be calculated too. But instead of 75, we want 50% on this one. Actually, negative 50% because we're trying to move upwards. And then that'll be it. Now, obviously, we run that won't do anything. That's just variables. Now let's use them. So we have the body. The styles we want in the body is just going to be a display flex, justify content center, and align items center. And I'll just center our envelope directly in the middle of the page. Then after that, we can do some CSS for the actual image, which has a class of invitation. And we can say position absolute. And then we can say width is equal to the variable we just created, which is going to be image dash width. And then we can say we want to transform it because it's straight up now. We want it to be on its side. So to rotate it, we can say transform, rotate negative 90 degrees because we want it to rotate left. Now let's run this. We should see it rotate and get a little smaller. And there you go. We have a smaller image and it's rotated. So we're off to a good start. Now we'll move on to the actual envelope itself. So the envelope is going to have a margin top of 50 view height, just because when we move it up, we don't want it to move off the screen. So we'll start a little lower. Position, relative, display flex. Same thing here. We want everything to be centered, our image and our icon and all that stuff. So display flex, justify content, center, align items, center. And then we'll have width, and we'll use the width we created up top for the envelope, which was dash dash envelope width. And then we'll have a height, and the height will just be the width of the image, because the image, while it's on the side, should take up the full envelope. So dash dash image width. If we run this, we won't really see much. The image might move down. Yeah, we'll see the image move down to where it should be. So now let's start with the actual creation of the envelope that we'll see. So let's create the front part that covers the image. It'll cover most of it. So we'll say dot envelope dash front. And this will be positioned absolutely just like the image will be. And then we'll say Z index of 1, which will just, we didn't give this a Z index, so it's going to have a Z index of 0. So anything with a higher Z index is going to go on top. Anything with a lower Z index is going to go on bottom. We want this front of this image to show up on top of this image, so we'll give it a higher Z index. So 1. And then we'll say width 0, height 0, and that'll make sense in a second. Bottom 0, because we want this to be at the bottom of the envelope container we created. Border dash left. And this border left, this is going to create that left triangle that we saw in the beginning. If you notice, this envelope is really just 3 triangles. So all we have to do is create those 3 triangles, and we can do that with border. So we can say border left, the size of the border is going to be however wide the image is. It's going to be a solid border, and it's going to have a color of, I have this hex color already saved, which is just a shade of green. And then border right, it's going to be pretty much the same as border left. Then border bottom is going to be similar, but it's going to be half the size, and it's going to have a slightly different color, still a shade of green, so we can get a little bit of distinction. And then we're going to have border top, and we're going to set that to variable, well, pretty much the same as bottom, except instead of having a color, this one's going to be transparent, because we want that top to be covered by the flap and not by the bottom, or not by this. And if we run that, we should be able to see it. And now we have this. We have our 3 triangles, which looks like an envelope. And we have a little bit of color distinction, so we can see this one a little bit better. But how does this even work? Well, what we notice is that we can use the border properties to create these triangles, because if we were to give all of these colors, like let's say border top was red, border bottom was blue, and this was yellow, and this was orange, we ran that, we would see this looks more like a border. And because the width is 0 and the height is 0, that's what's usually be in here, and this is just bordering that. And we get these triangle looking things because if they have different colors, it has to decide, okay, where does the top border end and where does the left border begin? And it just splits the difference, giving you these little diagonal lines. So we can go back by giving the left and right a color of green, we give the bottom a different shade of green, and we give top transparent, we get green, green, darker green, and nothing here. And now it looks like an envelope. Now we'll move on to the flap and the little section that goes behind here. So we call this envelope dash flap, comma just means and in CSS, like give these both the same styles, and envelope back. And we can say position absolute. We can say top 0 because we want this to be at the top of our envelope, or that envelope container that we created. And once again, width of 0 and a height of 0, so we can use that border. And then we can say border dash left, except in this case, our border left is going to be the transparent one, because we don't want anything here. We just want the top. So image width, solid, transparent. Same thing for border right. Image width, solid, transparent. And then border top is going to be similar to the one up here, but we're going to give it a color this time. And I have another hex color over here that I'll just copy. Now we run that and we have the top of our envelope. Now, because of the Z index, if this had a Z index, it'd be on top. Like if we gave it a Z index of 1, it would be on top. If we didn't give it a Z index, we don't really want it to be on top right now. We'll do that when we animate it. So let's just remove that for now. Or actually, no, we won't do that. We'll do that only for the envelope flap, not for the envelope back. So what we're going to go do is create an envelope flap. And then we're going to give that the Z index that we just had of 1, because the back should never be on top of the image. The back should always be behind the image, but the flap will be on top of the image. So this is specific to flap. Z index of 1, and then dot envelope back. We'll have its own specific stuff later, but not right now. And then the last thing we need to do is the stamp. And the stamp is just that SVG we saw. So it's just going to be position absolute with a width of about 5 view width and a height of about 5 view width. You can change that as you like. And for this, Z index is going to be 3. I just went 3 just to make sure it's always on top of everything. And then let's run it. And we have our stamp right here on top. Now this looks like a nice envelope. Now we just need to go through the fun part, which is going to be animating it to make it move. So to create animations in CSS, you use something called keyframes. So we'll say add keyframes. And then we give the animation a name. So let's call this one slide up. And slide up, what it's going to do is just slide the image up and turn it. So the way keyframes work is you give it a starting position, which is going to be 0%, and then you give it an ending position at 100%. So starting position is going to be, for the image, at the beginning, it's going to be transform. And that transform is going to be the rotate -90 that we did up above. that's how it starts off. It starts off rotated -90 degrees. And by the end of it, we want it to be transformed again, but we want it to translate along the y-axis by the variable move up that we created. So move up by however much move up was up here. So move up by about this much. And we also want it to rotate, so we just put a space to back to 0 degrees. So if it's at -90, back to 0, we'll straighten it up. And we want it to scale, which just means increase in size by about 1.5 of what it was before. And then we call our animation, we have slide up, we named it, so we can go and we can type animation slide up 3 seconds, which is just going to be how long it's going to take to complete. And then 2 seconds is going to be how long we want to wait before it runs. And then we're going to say forwards, which just means after it's done, stay like that and don't return to your original state. So let's see if that works. Seems like we're having a problem. So let's add another. We can add 50% in here, and we can go to slide up, and we can say transform, and we'll do all the same stuff as here, but at this point, it won't be scaled yet. So then let's run that. It looks like we're still getting an error. So let me try to figure this out. Okay, so there we go. It was just that we had this, we were missing a semicolon, rookie mistake. So now we have this animation slide up. We waits about 2 seconds, runs for 3 seconds, and at the end of it, it stays the way it ended off. And what does it do? It starts off rotated left, but around halfway through, it'll move up first while staying rotated left, and then it'll finish moving up, and then it will rotate back to straight, and it will scale up. So now our next animation is going to be our slide down for our envelope. So we can say at keyframes again, slide down, same thing, 0%, and then at 100%. And for slide down, we'll say we just want to move this one. We don't got to do all the rotating and expanding because we're just moving the envelope down. So translate y at the beginning is going to be a 0. So wherever it started off, that's where it's going to start. And then by the end, translate y. And we have that variable, so we can just use variable dash dash move down. And it will move down however much we told it to do in our variable. Now, obviously, I didn't do anything because we didn't tell it when to slide down or what should slide down. So we want to say, what do we want to slide down? We don't want the whole envelope to slide down because that covers everything. We want envelope front to slide down. So we'll say animation, slide down, and then we'll do the same thing. We want this to run for 3 seconds. We want it to wait 2 seconds, and we want it to keep the animation where it ended off instead of bouncing back. And so we see that slide down. We don't see these slide down. We'll add that later. But just to understand what I mean when I say bounce back, if we move forwards, you see after the animation completes, it'll go back to its original spot. Like that. So we'll put forwards back. And then we'll add this same animation to the envelope flap and the envelope back. Or we'll just add it to the back because the flap is going to do something a little bit different. So let's just say dot envelope back. Okay, so I see the error. We just forgot to actually put a dot here. That's why our envelope back isn't coming down. So let's run that again. There we go. Now that's the back of our envelope right there. And now we just need this to rotate along this top axis, rotate up, and then slide down as well. So let's do that. There's going to be 2 more animations. At keyframes, and then we'll call this one open flap. And then for open flap, same thing, 0%. And 100%. But inside of here, we want transform. And then for this time, we're going to say rotate along the x-axis, because this is the x-axis. We're going to say at the beginning, it should be rotated 0 degrees along the x-axis. And at the beginning, the transform origin is going to be the top. So that's this right here, instead of right down here at the bottom. And then we're going to say z-index. It's going to start off at 1, because at the beginning, it should be on top of the image. But by the end of it, it should be behind the image. So by the end of it, the z-index should be 0. The transform origin stays the same, but the rotation is 180 degrees. So we can say open flap Let's go to the flap, and let's say animation. Make sure we have our semicolons in here. And we're going to say open flap. And we want open flap to run for about 2 seconds, and then forwards stay that way. That's why we delayed these all for 2 seconds, so we can let the open flap run first. So let's see if that works out. Run that again, and we see the flap open, and then the image moves up. Now we have a couple of more problems left. We know our SVG isn't moving down, so let's just go ahead and add this animation to the SVG, or that stamp. And now the last piece, we need to make this flap move down. Now you might think we could just add the same animation that we added to all of them to the flap. And the way you add 2 animations is just by a space. That's a lie. It's with a comma. And you would think that might work, but the problem is slide down doesn't take into account where open flap ended, so slide down won't work. We'll need to create an actual slide down flap. So let's call that at keyframes slide down flap, which will kind of just take into account everything that's happened in open flap. And it'll just work like this. We'll say transform translate y. At the beginning it's 0, but at the beginning it is how this one ended off, which is rotated x 180 degrees. And at the end, it's still going to be rotated x 100 degrees. Except now our y value is going to be equal to the move down variable. And we don't longer need the z indexing or the transform origin. And now instead of using slide down, let's use slide down flap on the flap, with the same 3 seconds and 2 second delay to allow open to happen first. And we have another mistake, it's probably another semicolon. Or maybe not, let's take a look. It's like y0, rotate x 180 degrees, translate y, move down, rotate x 100 degrees. Oh, we use a hashtag instead of an at. So let's just fix that and then run this again. And open this, and we can see we have a beautiful CSS only email animation. And you can switch out this image for whatever you want. And if you want a different icon, you can just Google SVGs. And as I said before, I'll leave the link to this code pen in the description below. So yeah, leave any comments for anything you want to see next.